This question's from Very Professional Dodo. Hello there, gents. I come with a question about quote-unquote future compatibility because I think we might have seen one of the best examples of this in console history, with Starfield and Fallout 4 receiving the ability to play at 4K unlocked in visuals mode. Unfortunately, though, this is the exception, and I believe console manufacturers and developers underestimated the power of good future compatibility in the past. How many people would instantly upgrade from PS4 to PS5 if they could play Bloodborne at 4K 30 or 1440p 60 without needing any more developer intervention? This would invariably shift some of the onus from the developer to the user to toggle the right setting, but it would still be transformative while also maximizing future console sales as well. An alternative route would be the platform holder having the possibility to override settings at an API level and take matters into their own hands. This would probably be best, since it's clear that A, some developers don't think about next-gen hardware, and B, even if they did, they couldn't possibly anticipate the capabilities of future hardware with any degree of accuracy. Thoughts? Just before I hand this over to you guys, just to explain what's happening in Starfield and Fallout 4 is, but basically they give you two toggles, right? You can select the frame rate target, which can be 30, 40 or 60 or uncapped in the case of Starfield. But then you can also select between visuals and performance mode. Visuals has like higher fidelity settings and a higher resolution. So yeah, it's basically on Starfield a better situation with current hardware to set the game to performance mode with a 60 FPS target, because visuals mode is too demanding in a lot of content. But at the same time, that option is there. So if a more performant piece of hardware comes along in the future, you can actually select that and get the best of both worlds. So what do you think about this concept of future compatibility, John?
I think it works to some extent, and we've seen it before. I was thinking back to the original BioShock, if you recall, which had a VSync off toggle. I believe you did. So that kind of thing. And what you just mentioned there, what Fallout, Starfield do, perfectly reasonable. But he specifically mentions Bloodborne at 4K 30 or 1440p 60. And I think the problem there is that developers couldn't really implement any settings that wouldn't work on the current hardware.
Yeah.
Right? Like even if they were not performant, like they would still need to work.
Yeah. There's a memory issue.
Yeah.
You know, there's like 5 gigs of memory available to the base PS4. You know, developers aren't going to sort of put aside the memory required for a 4K frame buffer when that memory can be used more prodigiously elsewhere. And also it's just true. They can't necessarily guess what future APIs might be or how they would even like open themselves up to it. Or what about the consoles themselves? Like I assume when it's running on a PS5, it's like running in that PS4 kind of sandbox, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have more resources unless it depends on the game. Yeah, but it has to be patched to access that stuff. The best option would be an uncapped frame rate. Yeah, but I'm just talking about adding things like increased resolution or whatnot. Yeah,
this is it.
That stuff I don't think would be easy to do. You'd have to, I think, to make that work, you'd have to approach it more like Microsoft did with its backwards compatibility stuff. You know, where it's boosting res on 360 titles and original Xbox titles. It have to be done outside the game.
Another great example of what you could call accidental future compatibility, I think it was Wolfenstein, the New Colossus, which had a DRS setting. It was basically, the upper bounds was 4K, but then you could basically swap between native dynamic resolution or aggressive dynamic resolution, which basically lowered the bounds and allowed for higher frame rates. But, you know, going back to Xbox One X, which, you know, had that option, it wasn't a particularly great experience at native 4K. But when Series X comes along, out of the box, you get native 4K 60, which is great, right? And a similar thing is happening with Starfield there. I do think maybe something could be done when developers could possibly think to themselves, well, you know, let's think about what this game could be on more performant hardware and maybe offer an option for that, even if it's sort of buried within the options. What do you think, Tom?
I think there's definitely a distinction between a a system in the future allowing older games to just run completely sort of free to hit the max frame rate target that's possible. But there's that, and then there's actually adding code and tweaking the game with a patch to enabling it to do so. I think the question from Very Professional Dodo is about the first case where it's kind of blind, and the system at the receiving end, the future system, is just taking the software as is. And with that comes the issue of compatibility and unintended consequences of running the game in ways that it wasn't, higher resolutions, higher frame rates, let's say. Things like in Dark Souls or Bloodborne, there might be issues with, the timings of attacks. If you suddenly have the game run at 60, if that was suddenly possible, if you were to force that at an API level, there may be issues with if you were to bump the resolution up arbitrarily on an older game, with the HUD suddenly not aligning correctly, or just, obviously the assets will be low resolution as well. They'll be made for a 1080p display in Bloodborne's case. So there's a few snags to doing it that way, but maybe the best route forward is to allow the option on a future console, but have a little sort of warning saying, use at your own, caution.
Well, the option being discussed here about having an override at the API level is essentially what FPS Boost did, but it was curated. It's precisely because it doesn't work on every game. And this did lead to some scenarios where they actually put out an FPS Boost mode that did cause issues, that made it through all of the checks and balances. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, for example, had a crash with FPS Boost, and it was resolved by an engineer leaving Square Enix, deciding, hey, I'm going to actually put together a proper unlock frame rate patch.
Weekend's job.
I don't know how long that was, but it was the good thing to do, and it basically meant that an FPS Boost experience became a proper patch, properly validated, and they did a PS5 version as well. But yeah, I think I guess that's potentially the danger there, where you put in this this ability to consider future compatibility in the knowledge that it might not actually work, because you don't actually know what the hardware is and how it operates. But fundamentally, I do think there have been so many scenarios now where games that run with unlocked frame rates out of the box, or run with depressed performance, not hitting 60 frames per second, do hit 60 frames per second under back compat on a future machine.
True.
I do think
Very
there
true.
is something to be said for considering that in a game design.
I tell you what, I think it'd be good if most games going forward just included, similar to Starfield and Fallout 4, just a little checkbox hidden in the options to unlock frame rate. Say they've committed to 30. Just, it's not bothering anyone. It's purely at a user's discretion to use it. Like I'm thinking about a lot of Switch games coming out, like Paper Mario, for instance. I'd have liked to have seen the option just in case, just to make life easier in the future. But
okay, fair enough.